Las Vegas, March 1974. Elvis was halfway through Can't Help Falling in Love when he heard something impossible. A small voice from the crowd, singing every word perfectly. But this wasn't just any voice. This was a boy who, according to his parents sitting beside him, had never spoken a single word in his entire life. What happened in the next hour became the most miraculous moment in Elvis's career. The Boy Who Never Spoke, March 23, 1974, International Hotel, Las Vegas, 8:45 p.m. Robert and Linda Chen sat in the 8th row of Elvis's concert with their 9-year-old son Michael between them. They'd saved for 2 years to afford this trip from San Francisco, not for themselves, for Michael. Michael Chen had been diagnosed with severe autism at age 3. He'd never spoken, not a single word, not mama or dada or hungry or hurt, nothing. For 6 years, doctors had tried everything. Speech therapy, behavioral therapy, experimental treatments. Nothing worked. Michael lived in his own world, a world without words, but Michael had one connection to the outside world, Elvis Presley. It had started accidentally when Michael was 4. Linda had been playing an Elvis record while cleaning, and Michael, who usually ignored everything around him, had stopped what he was doing, walked over to the record player, put his hand on the speaker, and for the first time in his life, he'd smiled. From that day forward, Elvis's music was the only thing that seemed to reach Michael. He'd listen to the same songs over and over. Love Me Tender, Can't Help Falling in Love, In the Ghetto, hours every day. He couldn't speak the words, but he'd hum along, perfectly on pitch. He'd move his hands in patterns that seemed to match the rhythm. And sometimes, tears would run down his face. Robert and Linda didn't understand it. The doctors didn't understand it. But they knew. Somehow, Elvis's music connected with something deep inside their son. So they'd saved every dollar, worked extra shifts, sacrificed everything else for this one night for Michael to see Elvis live. They didn't expect a miracle. They just wanted their son to experience the music he loved in person just once. They had no idea what was about to happen. The sound that changed everything. The parents realized their son is doing something he's never done before. Elvis was halfway through his set. He'd already performed That's All Right, Hound Dog, Suspicious Minds. The crowd was electric, 19,000 people screaming, dancing, singing along. But Michael wasn't reacting like the others. He sat perfectly still, hands over his ears, eyes closed. The noise was too much. The lights were too bright. Linda worried they'd made a mistake bringing him. Then Elvis began Can't Help Falling in Love. The arena quieted slightly. This was the song people waited for, the romantic moment. The song that made grown men cry and couples hold each other. Elvis sang the opening lines. Wise men say, only fools rush in. And then Linda Chen heard something that made her heart stop, a small voice beside her, singing along. She turned to look at her son. Michael's hands were no longer over his ears. His eyes were open, and his lips were moving. But I can't help falling in love with you. Michael was singing. Every word, perfectly in tune, perfectly timed. Linda grabbed Robert's arm so hard she left marks. Robert looked at Michael and his mouth fell open. Their son, their 9-year-old son who had never spoken a single word in his entire life, was singing, not humming, not making sounds, singing, words, complete sentences, flowing naturally from his mouth like he'd been speaking his entire life. Shall I stay? Would it be a sin? Linda started crying. Not quiet tears, gasping, choking sobs of shock and joy and disbelief. The woman sitting next to her looked over concerned. Are you okay? Linda couldn't speak. She just pointed at Michael. That's my son, she finally managed to say. He's autistic. He's never spoken, not once, not ever, and he's singing. The woman's eyes went wide. She grabbed her husband. Did you hear that? Within moments, everyone in their section was watching Michael, watching this small boy with his eyes half closed, completely lost in the music, singing every word of Can't Help Falling in Love like he'd been born to sing it. Take my hand, take my whole life too. Robert was recording it with his camera, hands shaking so badly the footage would later be almost unusable. But he didn't care. He needed proof, because no one would believe this. The people around them had gone completely silent, no longer singing along themselves. They were listening to this little boy's voice, high and clear and pure, singing words he'd never spoken before. And then something even more impossible happened. Michael opened his eyes, looked directly at his mother, direct eye contact, something he'd never done in his life, and smiled. Then he pointed toward the stage and said in a voice that was small but perfectly clear, "Mama, Elvis." Those were the first words Michael Chen ever spoke. "Mama, Elvis." Linda collapsed into her seat, sobbing. Elvis stops the entire concert. 19,000 people hold their breath. Elvis was finishing the second verse when he heard it. A child's voice, singing along. But not like the other children in the audience. This voice was different, isolated, pure, coming from one specific spot in the crowd. Elvis had performed for millions of people. He knew what audiences sounded like. This was different. He kept singing, but started scanning the audience, trying to locate the source of that voice. "For I can't help falling in love with you." There, 8th row, a small boy, standing on his seat, singing with his whole heart. And around him, people were crying. Not because of Elvis, because of the boy. Something about the scene made Elvis's instincts kick in. Something was happening here, something important. Elvis did something he'd never done before. He stopped singing mid-verse. The band, confused, kept playing for a few bars before gradually stopping. 19,000 people fell silent. Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, shielding his eyes from the spotlights, trying to see the boy more clearly. "Excuse me, folks," Elvis said into the microphone. "Something just happened. I need a moment." He pointed toward the 8th row. "That little boy who was just singing, can someone help him come forward?" Security moved immediately. Robert and Linda, still in shock, still crying, lifted Michael and followed security toward the stage. The crowd watched in confused silence. What was happening? Why had Elvis stopped the show? As Michael got closer to the stage, Elvis knelt down at the edge. "Hey there, buddy," Elvis said gently. "What's your name?" Michael looked at Elvis, made direct eye contact, something that should have been impossible for a child with severe autism, and in a clear, strong voice he said, "Michael, I'm Michael." Linda gasped. That was a complete sentence, a response to a direct question, something Michael had never, ever been able to do. Elvis looked at Michael's parents. "Can you come up here, all of you?" The miracle that medicine couldn't explain. Security helped the Chen family onto the stage. 19,000 people watched in silence. Elvis stood with the microphone looking at Linda and Robert. "Tell me what's happening. Why is everyone around you crying?" Linda could barely speak through her tears. "Mr. Presley, our son is autistic, severely autistic. He's 9 years old, and until 3 minutes ago, he'd never spoken a single word in his entire life." The arena gasped collectively. "Not one word?" Elvis asked. "Not one," Robert confirmed. "No speech, no communication. We've tried everything for 6 years. Doctors said he might never speak." "But he loves your music," Linda continued. "It's the only thing that reaches him. We've been playing your songs for him since he was 4. And tonight, when you started singing 'Can't Help Falling in Love,' he just started singing along, every word. And then he looked at me and said, 'Mama.' That was the first word he ever said. 'Mama.'" Elvis stared at Michael. The little boy was calm, present, aware. Completely different from the typical presentation of severe autism. "Michael," Elvis said softly, "can you talk to me now?" Michael nodded. "Yes." The audience erupted. People were crying, screaming, praying. Elvis knelt down to Michael's level. "Can you tell me how you feel?" Michael thought for a moment. When he spoke, his words were slow but clear. "Your music. It makes the noise in my head stop. Everything is usually so loud and scary, but when you sing, it gets quiet, and I can think, and I can talk." Backstage, doctors can't explain what's happening. Elvis looked at Michael's parents. "Have doctors seen this?" "Not yet," Linda said. "This literally just started 3 minutes ago." Elvis made a decision. "Joe," he called to his manager in the wings, "get every doctor in this hotel up here, now. And someone call Sunrise Children's Hospital. Tell them we have a medical situation that they need to see." Then Elvis did something extraordinary. He sat down on the stage floor, cross-legged, pulled Michael to sit facing him. "Michael, I'm going to finish this concert, and you're going to sit right here with me while I do. Is that okay?" Michael nodded and smiled. For the next 45 minutes, Elvis performed the rest of his set while Michael sat beside him on stage. And throughout the entire performance, Michael sang along to every song, every word. Songs he'd heard on records but never sung, songs he couldn't possibly have memorized. Yet somehow, He knew every lyric. Backstage after the show, 3 doctors examined Michael, a pediatric neurologist who happened to be in the audience, the hotel's on-call physician, and an emergency team from Sunrise Hospital. None of them could explain it. "This isn't how autism works," the neurologist kept saying. "You don't just start speaking. Not like this. Not full sentences. Not after 9 years of complete nonverbal behavior." But they ran tests. Cognitive assessments, speech evaluations, everything they could do on short notice. The results were impossible. Michael was speaking at a 9-year-old level. Normal grammar, normal vocabulary, as if he'd been speaking his entire life and just chose not to until now. "It's like," the neurologist finally said, "like his brain had the ability all along, but something was blocking it. And somehow, Mr. Presley's music removed that block." What science couldn't explain. The Chen family stayed in Las Vegas for 3 more days. Elvis insisted on paying for everything, their hotel, their meals, the medical evaluations. Michael continued speaking. Full conversations, complete thoughts. He was still autistic. He still had sensory sensitivities, still needed routine, still had difficulty with certain social situations. But he could communicate. For the first time in his life, he could tell his parents when he was hungry or scared or happy. He could say, "I love you." He could tell them about the thoughts he'd been having for 9 years that they'd never known were there. On the 3rd day, Elvis visited them at their hotel. "I've been thinking about this," Elvis said. "About what Michael said. About my music making the noise." "Stop." He looked at Michael. "Buddy, can you explain that more?" "What noise?" Michael thought carefully. "There's usually too much. Too many sounds and lights and feelings all at once, like everyone's yelling in my head. I can't find my own voice in all that noise. But when I hear your music," Michael continued, "everything gets quiet, just for a little while. And in that quiet, I can find my words. Your voice is like a flashlight in a dark room. I can finally see where my words are." Elvis was crying. He pulled Michael into a hug. "Michael, do you know what you just did? You just spoke for every person who's ever felt like they couldn't express themselves. For every person who has something to say but can't find the words." He looked at Linda and Robert. "I want to help, however I can. Medical bills, therapy, whatever you need. But more than that, I want Michael to have access to music, not just my music, all music. If music is his bridge to communication, then he deserves to cross that bridge every single day." Elvis established a trust fund for Michael that day. Enough to cover experimental therapies, specialized education, and most importantly, music therapy for life. The boy who found his voice. Michael Chen is 59 years old today. He's a music therapist who specializes in working with nonverbal autistic children. He still considers himself autistic. He still has challenges, but he can speak. He can connect. He can help others find their voices the way Elvis helped him find his. In his office in San Francisco, he keeps 3 things on his wall: the ticket stub from March 23, 1974, a photograph of him sitting on stage with Elvis, a letter Elvis wrote to him 6 months before he died. 40 years later, that boy reveals what Elvis whispered to him. For 40 years, Michael never publicly shared what Elvis whispered to him during that concert. When journalists asked, he'd just smile and say, "That's between me and Elvis." But in 2014, on the 40th anniversary of that night, Michael finally revealed it. "When Elvis first sat me down beside him on stage," Michael said in an interview, "while everyone was watching and crying and trying to understand what was happening, Elvis leaned close to my ear and whispered something. He said, 'Michael, I don't know why you can talk now and you couldn't before. I don't know if it's a miracle or medicine or just a mystery, but I want you to know something important. Your voice matters. Whatever you have to say, it matters. Don't waste it. Don't hide it. Use it to help people the way my voice helped you.'" Michael paused, crying at the memory. And then he said, "You're not broken, Michael. You never were. You were just waiting for the right moment to let the world hear you. This is your moment. Don't be afraid." Those words changed my life, Michael continued. Not just because they came from Elvis, but because he was right. I wasn't broken. I was just waiting. And his music gave me the courage to stop waiting. March 23, 1974. A 9-year-old boy who'd never spoken began singing in the middle of an Elvis concert. Within minutes, he was speaking full sentences. Within an hour, doctors were examining him and finding no medical explanation. This isn't a story about Elvis having magic powers. This is a story about the mysterious power of human connection. Michael Chen's brain had the ability to speak all along. The wiring was there, the vocabulary was there, the thoughts were there. But something was blocking the pathway between his thoughts and his voice. And somehow, whether through the emotional resonance of Elvis's music, the feeling of safety in that moment, or something we'll never fully understand, that block disappeared. Scientists have studied Michael's case for decades. They've documented dozens of similar cases since: autistic children who began speaking during music therapy, Alzheimer's patients who remember lyrics when they can't remember their own children's names, stroke victims who can sing but can't talk. There's something about music that accesses parts of the brain that regular speech doesn't touch, something that builds bridges where bridges shouldn't be possible. But here's the deeper lesson. Elvis stopped the show. He heard something unusual in the crowd. He could have ignored it, could have finished his song, collected his paycheck, gone back to his hotel. He had 19,000 other people to entertain. Instead, he trusted his instincts. He stopped everything. He brought that family on stage. He made space for a miracle to happen in public. How many miracles do we miss because we're too focused on our schedules, too committed to our plans, too afraid to stop and pay attention when something unusual happens? Elvis chose to stop, chose to see, chose to help. And that choice gave a boy his voice. When was the last time you stopped what you were doing because your instincts told you something important was happening? Share below. Sometimes the most important moments in life require us to pause everything else and pay attention. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories for more moments, proving that connection, real human connection, can create what medicine can't explain. Share this with someone who works with special needs children, who's witnessed unexplained healing, or who believes in the power of music to reach places words can't touch. And if you're someone who struggles to communicate, who feels trapped in silence, who's waiting for your moment, hear this. Your voice matters. Whatever you have to say matters. You're not broken. You're not less than. You're just waiting for the right moment, the right connection, the right bridge between your thoughts and the world. Elvis stopped everything for a yid. Boy no one expected could speak, and that boy used the voice Elvis helped him find to spend his life helping others find theirs. The miracle wasn't that Michael could suddenly speak. The miracle was that someone stopped long enough to listen.